You are a toy!
Paula Pete Works here. I don't know how long this video is going to be. However, I found something very interesting during my video on chapter 1122, and I just wanted to make a separate video about it because I think it might be super important. Okay, so at the end of 1122, we see how Emmett looked back in the day, most likely around when he was first created, right? Okay, you know what's very interesting about this? He wore clothes, he wore overalls, which is going to be important in a second. However, we also see that he had X's on his arms. Now, many of people have equated this to the whole thing with Vivi that the Straw Hats did back in Alabasta. I think that could be very, very important later on because that could just be a symbol of friendship. However, thanks to my Discord member Minnie, he reminded me that X, or cross as X is referred to in Japan in a lot of projects, is a very prominent theme in One Piece, most likely because it is a pirate manga, but X could just be a universal symbol of collaboration, like how we have an organization in One Piece literally called Cross Guild, and Cross Guild is a collaboration of all these different pirates who did have organizations before they came together to form one singular guild, because a guild is an organization of people. So we're crossing over with different organizations to make one singular group. Makes sense. Crocodile had the whole of Baroque Works. Buggy was coming up in the ranks and just became a big business owner himself. Mihawk, though not one who has led an organization, was a big deal in the Warlords and is a big deal as the greatest swordsman in the world. So in that way, it makes sense that the X is just a symbol of multiple peoples coming together for one goal. And that's what pirate crews are, and that's what organizations often are. So that's what the X could mean. However, Emmett isn't wholly unique to One Piece. And I'm not talking about any recent robot. Looking back in the pre-time skip during Wapple's cover story, which is called the Omnivorous Hurrah, as you may or may not know, after Wapple is blasted out of Drum Kingdom, he becomes a public disturbance. Then he becomes arrested, which leads to him becoming a despot on the streets, which leads him to discovering that he can make toys by munching up garbage. This, in turn, allows him to become a small toy shop owner, and that business expands and expands and expands, eventually leading someone to discover that the toys contain a undiscovered alloy called Wapple Metal. This makes him extremely wealthy, which leads him to, again, becoming a king of the newly founded Black Drum Kingdom. However, during that come up, there's a particular figure that is highlighted. There is this toy that appears in chapter 251 for the first time that looks a lot like Emmett. It has the same knight's helm head like Emmett does. It has the big rotund body like Emmett does, and it's wearing overalls like Emmett did in the past, and it has the big sort of bulky Popeye arms. His aren't as detailed, but they're very similar to Emmett's. We see this toy again in chapter 255, in which someone makes the discovery that this is not just some normal toy, it is made of a particular alloy. The discovery of said alloy is what makes Wapple rich, and we see the start of his actual come up during chapter 256, in which he's holding said toy as he's being congratulated for this discovery. This is super important because, as you know, with Frankie making the General Frankie and a whole bunch of other inventions, Wapple Metal becomes a significant alloy that's present throughout the entirety of One Piece after this cover story. And it's super interesting that this one toy that looks like Emmett is at the genesis of all this popping off. Additionally, what I wanted to point out as well is that, much like with Emmett, this toy has an X on its body. However, unlike Emmett, the X is not on the toy's arms. It's on his chest. X marks the spot. This is super interesting too, given what has happened way after this cover story has finished, because as you know now, Luffy has an X permanently on his chest in the form of a scar, which then leads to that X being the place of where his power comes from, because as you know as well, when in Gear 5th, his heart activates the Drum of Liberation. So I'm wondering if this toy is foreshadowing things to come. Because on top of that, talking about recent events, it is very interesting that Wapol would somehow make a toy that looks like Emmett, while at the same time, Emmett was an enemy towards the world government and an enemy towards Emu. Guess who knows what Emu looks like? Wapol. So that's all very, very fascinating when you start to break things down in that way. Additionally, what this says to me too is that Emmett himself could be made of Wapol metal, which is why he is still in somewhat working condition even after centuries upon centuries have passed. However, looking at him, we now know, presumably, that Wapol metal does have limits because certain functions of Emmett would not work. But this leads me to my second idea of what I think what's going on with Emmett. Going back to the whole idea of Emmett being made of Wapol metal, I don't think this is the first time Wapol metal has existed in the world of One Piece. I think in the past, a previous Munch Munch fruit user, possibly a friend of Joy Boy's, was responsible for the creation of Emmett via making this metal. This is important because most likely Emmett was a big problem for the world government in the past. So when word got out that another Munch Munch fruit user has discovered the alloy again, which led to the creation of Emmett, the world government wasted no time in massaging the Munch Munch fruit user into their good graces and giving him everything he could want, so therefore he would never betray them again. And then they can use his alloy for their own devices, therefore preventing the rise of Joy Boy and his companions to come again. This is very interesting too, because again, the first toy that leads to the discovery of Wapol metal is a toy that looks like Emmett. I don't think that's by coincidence. I think that's very deliberate. So, in the past, a Munch Munch fruit user most likely created Emmett. Now, going off of the power source of Emmett, which is the Drums of Liberation, I think that's most likely due to the Soul fruit, which would make Emmett a homie. Let me explain. So the Soul fruit is responsible for creating some of the most complex automatons in the series of One Piece, called the Homies. The Homies are unlike any automatons we have ever seen created by Dofru, because it is being highly implied that they don't even need the Soul fruit user to be alive in order to function. This could be even further confirmed if, say, Pandora, the Sun Homie created by Mother Caramel, is still alive. And it's being suggested with the use of the homie Zeus, currently in the possession of Nami. However, we know that Dofru effects can last long after the death of the original user, because during Blackbeard's invasion of Amazon Lily, Hancock says that only she can de-petrify someone she petrifies, and if someone else were to eat the Love fruit, they cannot undo any petrification set by her. Going back to homies. Homies seemingly can be given rules or modifications that dictate how they function in the world. And when I say this, I'm referring to the homie known as Napoleon, because Napoleon has several different forms and will only act if Big Mom is in her right mind to give him direct commands, as when she is suffering amnesia and portraying the alter ego of Olin, she does not have the cognitive ability to give Napoleon commands. Therefore, Napoleon does not act because he is afraid. This makes me think that homies need to abide by rules. So, what if Emmett is a homie, and the rule that he abides by is that he will only be active when the drums of liberation have been played near him and exist? Therefore, now in the current story, we know that Luffy activated the drums of liberation on Egghead, which woke him up, and now he's moving around. However, when the drums of liberation are extinguished, Emmett simply goes back to sleep, awaiting for the next time the drums of liberation are played, which is why he stopped at a dead halt in the past. Presumably, that is when Joy Boy died. So, putting all these things together, what do I think this means for the future? Well, I think that there's possibly going to be another giant robot like Emmett in the future, made of Wapol metal, that runs off the power of the Soul Fruit and is activated via the drums of liberation. So, with that being said, I think that based on all the players necessary for this to happen, this makes this theoretical outcome a very viable possibility. Simply because Wapol is on the run now, seeing as how he has seen Emu, which is a great offense and now makes him an adversary of the world government. So it's very possible that sometime in the future, he and Vivi will meet up with the Straw Hats, and Wapol will be bullied into becoming a member of the Grand Fleet. This is very on brand too, considering in the Egghead arc, we have gotten a lot of old villains being confirmed to be moving around and joining other organizations. So, with that being said, too, given that Big Mom is one of the few characters who is very intimately connected with giants and giant culture, it's very likely that we're going to see her sometime in Elbaf. I think ultimately Big Mom may just be the only old Yonko organization that turns into an allied force, and she will presumably aid in the birth of a new Emmett, giving this new giant robot specifications to only activate when Luffy's drums of liberation are active, because it's very likely too, given that she grew up in giant culture, that she knows about Nika, and her attitude towards Luffy may shift when she sees that he indeed has become the sun deity Nika. So that's a lot of presumption, but I think based on the lore that we have been given so far, these things are very possible. Moving forward, I don't know what this new Emmett would do in the narrative, but it may be a very powerful weapon that is needed to combat the forces of the world government, because we don't actually know how big or how vast the world government's weapons are at this moment in time, because there are some players that have yet to reveal themselves. With that being said, give me your thoughts